You know, our phones are pretty much everything these days. Our wallets, our boarding passes, our keys. So isn't it kind of strange that most of us still need to pull out a plastic card just to get some cash from an ATM? Well, it's a modern paradox, and a really fascinating study decided to dig into this exact mystery. Today, we're going to unpack their entire investigation.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the paradox itself. Then, we're going to meet the four key suspects that the researchers identified. We'll follow the clues they gathered from real customers, reveal the one factor that totally cracked the case, and finally, we'll figure out what this all means for the future of cash. So, right at the heart of this study is a real head-scratcher. Why would someone want to ditch their debit card, but still want physical cash, and be perfectly happy using their phone to get it? It seems like a contradiction. So, what's really going on here? And that brings us to the core question that really drove this whole research project. I mean, for a generation that basically runs their entire life from a smartphone, having to rely on a piece of plastic for something as simple as a cash withdrawal, it just doesn't quite add up, does it? Okay, so let's just lay out the situation here. On one side, you've got traditional card withdrawals, and we all know the risks, things like card cloning and skimming fraud. But then on the other side, you have this cardless tech that seems to solve all of those problems. It's more secure, it's more convenient, and you don't even need to carry your wallet. On paper, this should be a no-brainer. Now, to solve a mystery like this, the researchers knew they couldn't just guess. No, they needed a really solid framework for their investigation. So they turned to a classic, proven model from the world of technology research to figure out the most likely reasons behind our behavior. And that framework? It's something called the Technology Acceptance Model, or TAM for short. You can think of it like the official rulebook for understanding why we decide to adopt or ignore new tech. It's been used for decades, so it was the perfect starting point for this whole investigation. So using this TAM model, the researchers lined up their four main suspects. These are the factors that could explain why someone would choose to go cardless. First, how useful is it? Second, is it easy to use? Third, how secure does it feel? And finally, how much do I actually trust my bank with this stuff? And this chart, well, it lays out their game plan perfectly. They took each one of those suspects and turned it into a really clear, testable hypothesis. The logic was super simple. If people felt good about any of these things, usefulness, ease of use, security, or trust, they should, in theory, prefer the cardless option. All they needed now was the evidence. So, how do you test something like that? Well, the researchers went straight to the source, the customers themselves. And this, my friends, is where the investigation really starts to heat up. Their method was actually really clear and direct. First, they built a questionnaire that covered all four of those key factors. Then, they surveyed 521 customers from one of India's biggest banks, a bank that was an early adopter of this tech. And finally, they took all that data and used predictive analytics to crunch the numbers. Okay, get ready for this, because this is the first huge clue they uncovered. A whopping 82% of the customers they surveyed said they actually prefer the cardless withdrawal option. I mean, that's a massive number. And honestly, it just makes the mystery even deeper. And that's the big twist in the story, right? If nearly everybody already says they prefer the new technology, then why isn't it the default way we all get cash? What is the hidden barrier that's holding it back? The answer had to be buried somewhere in that data they collected. And here we go. This is the moment of truth in the investigation. After running all their analyses, the researchers were able to start eliminating the suspects one by one until only the real reason for customer preference was left standing. So first to go, surprisingly, it wasn't about how secure people felt the technology was. That wasn't the deciding factor. Next up, it wasn't about their level of trust in the bank either. Another suspect cleared. And in an age where using an app is basically second nature, even how easy the technology was to use, well, that wasn't the real driver either. So, with three suspects down, that leaves just one. With everyone else cleared, the investigation zeroed in on the one factor that mattered more than anything else: perceived usefulness. It all boiled down to a really simple question. Does this new technology actually help me in a practical, day-to-day way? But why? Why was usefulness the silver bullet when security, trust, and even ease of use kind of fell flat? Well, this last part of the investigation reveals the logic behind that result, and it's pretty compelling. Okay, this chart right here is basically the statistical smoking gun.
The researchers' analysis measured the real impact of each factor. And for trust, ease of use, and security, the impact was statistically insignificant. But just look at perceived usefulness. The data shows this incredibly strong positive link to customer preference. It was the only one that truly mathematically mattered. So when you put it all together, the logic becomes really clear. The researchers concluded that for today's customers, things like security and trust, those are just baseline expectations. They're assumed. And ease of use, that's a given. So the only question left that truly influences their choice is the most practical one of all. Is this thing actually useful to me? Does it solve a real problem better than my card already does? So the case is solved. We know what's driving customer preference. But what does that really mean for banks and, well, for the future of how we access our own money? The big takeaway here for the entire banking industry is crystal clear. The study is basically saying that all those marketing campaigns focused on telling us how secure or easy cardless tech is, they're missing the point. To get people to actually adopt this stuff, banks need to shift their whole focus to showing us the practical, real-world usefulness of leaving that card behind. And that brings us to one final provocative question. I want you to forget about easy or safe for a second. Let's just assume those are a given. The real question is about utility. So, what specific feature or benefit would make cardless cash technology so undeniably useful that you'd never even think about reaching for your plastic card again?